Hey, it's Chris from Liege Games. Monday. Let's talk the hotness. Let's see what we got going on. Hope you liked the last week's roundup. May is just going to be starting to heat up, literally and metaphorically speaking, especially going into June. There is just, I feel like a lot of stuff that's going to fly under the radar and all of a sudden just kind of smack you in the face coming with May and June. Because I think there's still a bunch of stuff that's going to be not yet announced that's really going to be driving things home. Looking ahead even at my June, Kickstarters to know, Kickstarters to be aware of side of things, I think it's going to be a bunch of heavy hitters. So budget is just like messed up after this last month too, with trying to figure out, what the MU Pledge Manager, Marvel United Pledge Manager is going to look like with the addition of those expansions at the end. They just threw basically everything in the MU, like literally under the sun, at us. So not sure what I'm going to do with that yet. Working on trying to figure out, because I've got a couple Kickstarter games, like preview reviews, not getting paid for them, but they're sending me copies of games so I can put a video out before the campaign, late May and early June. So I'm going to be trying to do that. I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to try and get a horizontal arm for a stand so that I can give you guys some top-down gameplay to go along with those videos. And, just kind of whatever else comes up. A couple reviews, hopefully a review or two this week for you guys. And there's a lot of stuff on the hotness, and there's a lot of just, news kind of flowing out that I've sort of picked up. And so we'll talk about a little bit of that too today. And just, like always, whatever tickles my fancy. So that's it. Let's get into this. If there's anything, as always, you want me to talk about, if there's opinions you want me to mention or talk about as well in the future, let me know. So, yeah. Let's kind of go from there. Let's do this. Look, first up, I've mentioned it already like twice, Stationfall. The up to 12 player, heavy-ish deduction type game set in a space station where you are trying to escape before it explodes while trying to achieve your objectives, your missions, your quests, whatever you want to call them, while potentially foiling other people from doing the same, while also having a monster running around on board. So, as I talked about in the roundup, the price was, when I was thinking of what this was going to look like, I was hoping that the price was going to be less. And I'm really torn on this because I want to love it. I love the gameplay, and Andy in the comment section on one of the previous YouTube videos offered a chance to play it online, and so, I just had my first foray, as I mentioned at the end of the week last week, about Tabletop Simulator, and so now that I have, one whole game under my belt, or part of a game at least, I may consider taking him up on that. But at the same time, I feel like it's not the gameplay that's in question for me. I think the gameplay is very solid. And I think the gameplay is something I'm going to like. It's just more, of the price point. It's more of that side of things. I don't think I need to play it personally myself always to know, we've all been there. There's games that you look at and you go, yeah, I feel like I want to play this one before I kind of get a sense of it, to feel like what's actually going on, how it jives with me. And there's other games you look at and you go, I can tell by the gameplay this one is clearly not for me, or this one is. And this one gives me more that clearly this is more for me vibe. But it's just that price I'm struggling with. As a heavier deduction game, I guess I was just hoping for something in the 40s or 50s range before shipping even. And that's partially because I don't have the player count to play this at a more optimal player count, because I feel like the optimal player count is going to be probably 4 or even 5 plus. And that's not something even pre-pandemic I was really able to do. But that is why it's number one or near the top of the hotness right now, is because it looks that solid. Now, the Kickstarter, you can make an argument. It's not blowing things out of the water. It's not gangbusters. But for a game you might not have heard of a month ago, 140 grand is still very, very impressive. Especially if you put it in terms of the genre that it is, as a more social deduction meta-ish game. So I give them a ton of kudos for doing that and doing this well. I mean, social deduction games do not typically do great on crowdfunding. Now, how much of it is from the miniatures? I'm going to make the argument that it's less from the miniatures here. That people aren't just getting it because it's a bunch of plastic. They're getting it because of the gameplay, because the miniatures are, the miniatures are much more secondary in this case, at least to me personally. The other dilemma I think with this one is, I think with a map this big, I would really be interested in a playmat. Not to say that you couldn't do it without it, but I just think of the folding and sometimes the wear and tear on the folding in these situations of a map that is that big. And so that would be the serious temptation as well on that side of things. The other thing I think you have to be aware of in this game is that the learning curve, and this is what sets it apart from your typical social deduction game, is it is going to be a lot higher. The learning initial curve is just steeper. And so if your group is not for that, that is probably going to not be a good fit for them. I think this is also a game for me, though, at an undefined point in the future, it will be in my collection. It's just one of those, do I pick it up now? Do I get it in trade later? Do I buy it later? And I don't know the answer to that question. But, I mean, it's doing, again, something different. And I like the fact that they are doing something different and they are getting rewarded for it because they're doing it in a stellar way. So say what you will about the price point, say what you will about the miniatures, all of that aside, you put out a really, really good product and people support it. And that's what that $140,000 so far means. And that's why it's making the hotness. Next up is Merchant's Cove. This is from Final Frontier Games, and this is another crowdfunder. And why it's on the hotness right now is it's delivering to backers. And so all over social media, people are posting about it, people are hyping it, people are talking about it, and it's being, described, whether rightly or wrongly. I see people comparing it to the Euro version of asymmetric factions of Root, if you will. As opposed to Root being the war game version, this is more of the Euro version. Each person is one of these different merchants with asymmetric strengths in order to maximize their ability to make a profit. You're competing against each other to attract customers, maybe cutting corners by hiring some of the locals or some of the production to make it a little bit cheaper or faster, and selling over a 3-day span to see who can make the most profit. Like, this is one of those games that I see personally, like, all of a sudden getting the hype, and it makes you get, like, a little itchy trigger finger, like, ooh, maybe I should get this one. Ooh, this is getting the hype. Maybe this is something I missed, and maybe this is something I like. For me, I get that feeling. And then I reminded myself, Chris, this is a Euro game. And I was like, oh, okay. Whew. FOMO wore off real quick then. I was like, okay, good. Nope, good. Asymmetrical. I heard asymmetrical and I heard hype and I heard hotness. But then I reminded myself and then we were good. But for you Euro game fans out there, it'll be interesting to see how this compares and how this stacks up to Root in the asymmetry, but just to other Euro games where there is less asymmetry. Are people going to like this style of Euro game more? Is it going to be a niche within a niche within a niche? Or are you going to see that people really enjoy this and it's going to be, a little bit of an inspiration for other games in the near future? So that's why it's interesting and that's why it's worth talking about. Again, even though it's not personally of high interest to myself, because it's of interest to the hobby in general when we look at something like this and see how it has influences and spreads its tendrils outward. I mean, it also helps when you've got some of the bigger reviewers like Board Game Co. giving it a thumbs up as well. Definitely to increase the awareness on that side of things. So, all in all, I don't know what to expect of it. Oftentimes with games like this that come out and they get really good press, I wonder if you're not going to also see all of a sudden an expansion or something else related to it pop up within usually 2 or 3 months on Kickstarter. So I don't know if there's anything in line with that side of things, but, as much as whatever side of the argument you fall on when it comes to the hype and the hotness, like from a business perspective, you strike while the iron is hot. Period. So, I don't know. There you go. It's Merchant's Cove. Next up is Micro Macro Crime City. And this, I believe, is sort of described as sort of the Where's Waldo, only like done in an actual board game. And the reason it's gotten a little bit of hype recently is twofold. I believe, no pun included, did a review on it recently. And then I believe it was also just nominated for the Board Game Geek Awards of 2020. And so that is why all of a sudden you're seeing it pop up of nowhere, in case you had no idea that this was on anybody's radar or even what it was in the first place. You're looking for scenes in this big map to essentially help you solve specific crimes or cases that are going on. And so that's sort of why it's got the Where's Waldo sort of vibe, where people are calling it kind of sort of a board game, but kind of sort of not at the same time. But either way, people seem to really like it. So that's why it got nominated. That's why it's getting the good press and the good review right now. But it's a small box game. It's quick to play. Again, there you go. That is Micro Macro Crime City. Again, on the Kickstarter side of things, we have My Father's Work, which is currently over $500,000 on Kickstarter that's currently funding. And again, if you're not familiar with this is just a recently launched Kickstarter from Renegade Games Studios that is taking a generational approach to the Euro game, where you are trying over 3 generations to create the ultimate masterpiece of works through a series of inventions leading you to your pièce de résistance, if you will. The tricky part being that you have 3 types of workers in order to gather the resources and produce what you need to produce, each with their own limitations in where they can go and what they can do, but then also with only a limited transition of resources and materials and ideas between said 3 generations, as the first passes to the second and the second passes to the third, which then makes you approach those very differently as well. It is blowing, frankly speaking, expectations, at least from my side of things, out of the water. I was thinking $200,000 or $300,000. Like I said, already over $500,000. That's very impressive. Not many Euro games get that, but the price point is also expensive. The price point is around $100. So it is definitely higher on the end of the pricey side of things from a Euro game as a whole. It is also somewhat scenario based, so you have different scenarios that you can be running through as you're playing it as well. The other side of things is that it does have miniatures as these workers, so that is led in part to that increased cost as well, I'm assuming. At this point in the campaign, they've also said that they're unlocking all the stretch goals, even though there is almost a week left in the campaign. Now, they also say that they're not going to be selling at distribution at retail. Obviously, Renegade Games Studios is going to be selling it, but what will the price point be? Will it be a retail or the deluxe version that you're getting now? And again, timing-wise is probably the other factor there. How much after Kickstarter backers get it will you be able to get it that way? So, maybe if you don't want some of those deluxifications, you're better off the other route. But if you're looking at it now, you got a couple days left, so go on and check it out. That is My Father's Work. Next up is Undaunted North Africa, a sequel to the widely panned as very good Undaunted Normandy. It was also up for one of the best war games and 2-player games of the year on the Board Game Geek Awards. On top of that, there has also been a new campaign-ish game, big box version, at an unnamed date as of yet. Now, if you're not familiar, it is taking the war game and distilling it down to a 2-player asymmetric, tactical, card-driven, scenario-based game. This game in particular takes Britain's long-range desert group and pits it up against Italy's forces in the northern African desert. And in case that wasn't enough, not only was it nominated for the best 2-player game, it won this year in 2020. It is a deck builder, And there are consequences. As you have wounded soldiers throughout the campaign, they leave your deck. You have to adapt. It adds the addition of vehicles in this as opposed to Normandy, the first game. And like I said, at its core, it is still a war game, even though it is a more accessible version in the card/deck builder. And because of its innovation, it's getting recognized in the Normandy version as well as the North Africa version. Now, both have their ups and downs, both have their pluses and minuses, but people overall seem to really enjoy them, even the non-war gamers. So if you're looking for something of that ilk, but don't want to dive into the heavier side of things, people are saying that this is a nice transition, especially as a two-player asymmetric game. So if that's of interest to you, that's why it's on the Hotness. That's why you can check it out. Next up is Under Falling Skies. Now, again, staying on the same theme, in case you weren't paying attention, the Board Game Geek Awards have put a lot of stuff on a lot of people's radar that may not have been there before, and this is no exception. This was one of the nominees and also the winner of the Best Solo Game of 2020 for the Board Game Geek Awards. It is basically the board game version of Space Invaders from Atari, right? And they're using clever dice play and board management to simulate this to a very, very good degree. This game is very highly thought of, even from a non-solo gamer perspective. You're taking defense of this besieged city and trying to drive off the alien defenders. Unique dice placement mechanic, lower numbers, less powerful, make the creatures and the aliens advance slower, bigger numbers, more consequences, advance faster, but have more explosions. You're also doing research and you have a tech tree that you're trying to upgrade, so you can't forget about that at the same time while the mothership is getting closer and closer and closer and closer. And people are very happy with it right now. So if you have any inkling on the solo side of things, this one even has me potentially interested to trade for it. You know, this would be a nice solo game to play with the kids sitting next to me. You know, like, hey, what should we do here, buddy? Hey, how should we use this one, buddy? Hey, do you want to try this? Would it be a keeper in my collection? You know, maybe, maybe not. But it'd be one that I'd be happy to try out sometime too. So if that has any appeal to you, especially now with the pedigree of the Popularity Award from the Board Game Geek Award from 2020, check it out. But that is why it's on the Hotness as well. So next up is Marvel United X-Men. And it's really Marvel United on the Hotness list, but it's because this just ended CMON's almost $6 million campaign, intense amount of money. They threw everything, including the kitchen sink there at the end in terms of stretch goals and the expansions with the Deadpool and the Sentinels and the Fantastic Four there at the end. And now I'm not surprised at the same time that Fantastic Four got thrown in there because like on the movie side of things, the rights have all been like coalesced under the same umbrella now again. So I guess if you're going to have the other have it all, I guess it makes sense to have this have it all as well. I guess just no one was really expecting it. You know, if you're going to throw that in, what's going to be next, right? Galactus, Marvel United, the Eternals. I don't know. But we'll see. I mean, I think, honestly, still, if you're just talking about what's the most value, the Apocalypse Pledge is by far the most value for bang for your buck. And I guess for an additional $195, is it worth getting all of the other expansions? Not to include any of the cardboard stuff that they're basically throwing everything into a thick cardboard tile, if you will, including stuff from the last campaign. So, I don't know. I'm probably going to pass on all the cardboard stuff. As you know by now, I'm not a big fan of the non-gameplay. Especially then if it's going to cost me the gameplay instead. But I don't know. I just don't feel great about the Deadpool. I don't feel great about like First Class. I don't feel super good about, you know, that side of things as much as I want all the others. And from a value standpoint, especially with them pledge locking, like I guessed and hoped they weren't going to do with Old Man Logan, just like they did with Adam Warlock, right, of the first campaign. I just don't know, because there's so much else out there, you know, Storm Sunder, Hyperspace Kraken, and all of the other big campaigns coming up. Is it worth another $195? Because again, that's like a whole Storm Sunder plus pledge right there for just one game. And I guess you can make the argument that if you're going to be able to play this game that much, how many games, you know, can you have in your collection and get through? So I guess this is one less game with just more content. And if I play this the most, will it justify itself? I mean, this is already high up on my list of most games played for adult-ish games, like purely kid-based games. So it's going to be tempting. And I'm glad I split it up, but I still don't have a clue what I'm going to do. And yeah, the content there is just amazing. I give them kudos for having all of this done. And again, I don't really like the, oh, is Nightcrawler going to be in it or not? Like, okay, you know Nightcrawler's going to be in it. They've got the models, they've got the renders, they've got all that stuff. I mean, just, I wish the authenticity of the stretch goals was a little bit more prevalent nowadays on Kickstarter. And that's one of the issues I have with this. But so be it. I mean, it's the nature of things, unfortunately, at times too. But all in all, yeah, we'll see where it goes. I have absolutely no idea, guys. I have absolutely no idea. I would not be surprised if I'm coming back to you 1 or 2 months from now and saying, yeah, I did the whole 195 extra, got the everything. Would not be surprised at that. I would not be surprised if I went like Gold Team, Blue Team, Phoenix 5, and maybe like one of the other expansions, like the Sentinels. I would not be surprised if I just piecemealed it there either. So, we'll see. Next up, the other big announcement that sort of got leaked towards the end of the week was Voidfall, the latest Turksy and Buckle game coming from Mindclash Games, taking the Mindclash experience to the 4X realm in space. And the joke going around on Board Game Twitter is you just got to have a game that ends in fall to be able to be on the Hotness. So what do you need to know about Voidfall right now? Besides the narrative that goes along within the Board Game Geek page, they already say that there is going to be a solo cooperative mode as well as a head-to-head competitive mode of a tight decisions Euro-style 4X space game and everything that it entails. You play as one of the great houses. You are either pushing back the evil entity in the galaxy known as the Voidborn in the solo or the cooperative mode, or competing against said rival houses with their asymmetric strengths and weaknesses in the head-to-head competitive mode. 3 rounds in which you're going to be doing so. Each round taking place with a galactic changing event, they call it. Alongside that galactic changing event, also a new scoring condition and new focus cards that you're going to be able to play and use. And they go outright saying that the combat is going to be deterministic. There is not going to be luck. So those of you who are wishing for that side of things, you have got your wish already. Outmaneuvering, out-strategizing is how you win. And that is what they're known for. Heavy strategy games. So what are we going to get? Is this going to be another Stellaris? How does this compare to Eclipse or Twilight Imperium, which is probably not at all on the Euro side of things. But what are you going to be looking at? How miniature heavy is it going to be? How many component-wise is it going to be? What is the price point going to be? Is it going to be under triple digits? Unlikely. But who knows? Is it going to appeal to the casual? Or is this a hardcore for the hardcore heaviness side of things? Now, they've gone into a little bit of detail in the forums, and one of the main topics seems to be so far of how competitive, how aggressive, how take that is this. And they say that there are going to be different maps that are going to allow or present a different level of aggression depending on what your group prefers. Now, it looks like they're going to be putting up some sort of probably updates, designer diaries, whatever sort of that thing might look like. They talk about it a little bit here on Mindclash's website themselves. And they talk about the fact that all they say is it's coming to Kickstarter this fall. So if you're a fan of that side of things, if you're a fan of that genre, if you're a fan of Mindclash games, you better have it on your radar because you know it's going to cost you a pretty penny. So what else is going on in the news and notables right now? Quacks of Quenlinburg, you may be familiar with it from being one of the more popular games of the last several years, especially as a broad appeal, pressure luck type of game where you're drawing tokens from a bag hoping not to explode your potion. You may have also been aware that it's sort of been in between publishers. And the printings of it were decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. I think they actually lost the publishing rights, something like that. It was going in between. Well, if you've been a little bit worried about if you're going to be able to pick it up for a reasonable price, CMYK Publishing has picked up it as well as the rights for the latest expansion, the Alchemists, and that is going on pre-order right now. So no FOMO is necessary if you're interested in getting this anytime in the future. I'm a big fan of it. I love it. It's great to play. It's probably just slightly above the kids level right now as my 7-year-old, but it's a great group game for something casual. So I really appreciate it. I have the Herb Witches expansion. I have not looked into the Alchemists too much, but we'll kind of see. Do I need more of a good thing? But if it's been on your radar, now you know. You may be wondering why I'm pulling up this page from Oink Games. Now, not this game necessarily in particular, but Oink Games is now digitalizing their titles and taking them online to Nintendo Switch. So they're running a Kickstarter launching later in May, and so you can be able to get some of your games on there if you are using that console. And again, it's news and notable because we're seeing a broader base appeal to a broader audience for the board game scene, and that is always a positive for our hobby. And hopefully then we will see more go that way in the future. I mean, we're already seeing it on iOS, we're already seeing it on Android, so it's just kind of to see where else can this be taken. So that's why it's notable. Speaking of games that have been sort of in between runnings, printings, hype, that sort of thing, Tyrants of the Underdark. In case you didn't know, Tyrants of the Underdark, based on Dungeons and Dragons, 2 to 4 player area control deck building game, very highly praised with those two combinations of mechanisms, not usually seen a lot. Underappreciated, you could argue, underknown as well as just kind of a game that never really got its due diligence from a lot of its biggest fans. Well, now, behold, there is going to be a second edition. Also of note is that the expansion is going to be included in the main box, and they're going to be tokens instead of miniatures as one of the other big changes. It is already available for pre-order on many of the main big online distributors. You can see here the official announcement. I mean, it's like 2 lines from Gale Force 9, the website, and the pre-order is also going to be in multiple languages this time around as well. The tentative release date is in December 2021. Next up, Funkoverse, underrated, along the lines of sort of your unmatched, skirmish tactical light style game, just announced that they are having the Marvel version of them. I mean, if the Golden Girls wasn't enough, now you can do Golden Girls, Harry Potter, and Marvel all on the same battle map. If that doesn't tickle your fancy, I don't know what's going to. Oh, did I mention the fact that they're also going to have a separate Thanos expansion? There you go. Is this going to be the thing that actually gets you to try it in the first place? We'll kind of wait and see. So this next thing is probably under the radar for a lot of you, but if you're like me, your origins into geekdom started elsewhere. And so for me personally, I started with fantasy books. And one of my favorite series was The Wheel of Time. And how does this relate? This is Brandon Sanderson's page. Brandon Sanderson took over The Wheel of Time after Robert Jordan passed away. But he is now going into and more known for his latest series, the Stormlight Archive. And now, what does this have to do with things? How am I tying this all together back into board games? He recently announced on his homepage that he did a poll of what his audience, what his followers would like in terms of the style or depth of a board game set in the Stormlight Archive. Which, if you are a fan of the Stormlight Archive or have read any of the books, is really exciting because this is a massive IP in the fantasy world right now. Here you can see what it actually entails. It runs the whole gamut in terms of games. Light, and they even give examples so people that are more or less familiar can kind of get a sense of what they mean by that. Like Splendor or Ticket to Ride. Medium, like Small World or Dune Imperium. Medium, right? Heavy, like War of the Rings, right? Okay, War of the Rings. Legacy, a la Gloomhaven. Or RPG. Now, I'm not going to want the RPG, but something tabletop? That would be amazing, right? So, we'll see what ends up happening. I mean, clearly he's licensing it out or thinking of licensing it out or whatever's going to happen with it. And who knows, it's probably not going to be before like 2023, 2024 before we ever saw anything. But as a fan of the IP in general, it's kind of cool. So, thought it was worth talking about this week. Since you know me and I can't resist Japanese imports, the game Wind the Film from 2016 is getting a remake from the French publisher Matagot. Mispronouncing that, obviously. It is going to be retitled Photograph. This edition, as you can see here, much more colorful and redone to a broader audience, a broader appeal, and it is going to be released on May 14th. What you're trying to do in this game is you are trying to take photographs and put them in the order in which they're supposed to be based on the order you took them in the first place. What you're doing is you're adding anywhere from 1 to 3 cards to the beginning of your hand, then taking a card further back in your hand and moving it up 1 spot, and then discarding as many as you want from the end to try and make the best line in most accurate order by the end of the game. So a very different hand management game, very flying under the radar, but very well thought of on the Japanese import side of things. And now that it's going to be remade and hopefully be available at a much wider audience, hopefully get a little more exposure as a relatively good game. Last but not least, I just could not resist this, right? You ever been to Disney World? Ever wanted to go to Disney World? Ever heard one of the most annoying songs or arguably best songs, depending on who you are and how you feel about Disney World? It's a Small World, after all, is getting a board game, after all, right? 2 to 6 players, card-driven game to represent you going around the world between different places, retailing for about $25 in July 2021. They describe it as a find and match game with a 3D centerfold that you're going to be using in order to do that. I have no idea. It's probably not going to be for me, but just thought I'd mention it out of sheer entertainment. So there you go. So that's it. That is your board game news. Whatabouts for the hotness right now. Side note, trying to just think of other things to do. Trying to debate what would get you interested in something like my Patreon. What would you want to see on there in order to get you to take a look at it or subscribe that? What would you like to see on a TikTok from me if I do TikTok? What of those other things would be of interest to you? Anything? Nothing? Just throwing it out there. Testing the waters, as they say. So, another review coming later this week. A couple Kickstarter previews that I'm working on as well. We'll just kind of see what comes up, and we'll see where things go. As always, let me know in the comments section. If you like, hit the button down here in case you're not already on. Trying to get 10,000. Either way, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Stay classy. Have a great week.